In this video, we are going to learn Tosfos Ho Kania beYiosh, or at least selected parts of this Tosfos. The Gemara earlier on the Amud discusses this a stolen animal and says that it is possible to bring as a carbon, and this is whether it's before Yiosh or after Yiosh. And the Gemara's implication, the Gemara's meaning is clear, that it's saying whether or not it belongs to the Ganev, it is still a problem to bring as a carbon. The implication from this Gemara is that the Yiosh is what makes it the Ganev's. And despite that, the Gemara is saying you're not allowed to bring it as a carbon because of mitzvah haba ba'aver. But the implication is that when we say before and after Yiosh, it is basically saying whether it belongs to the Ganev or not. The problem with this is that this Gemara that we're quoting was said by Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But Rabbi Yochanan himself holds that Yush by itself is not enough for a Kinyan. Where do we see that? Because elsewhere in Gemara and Bava Kama, Rabbi Yochanan says that a Ganev who steals a sheep or an ox, with regards to which we know the halacha is that if he then goes and sells or shechts it, he has to pay tashlume arba v'chamisha, 4 or 5 times the amount. And Rabbi Yochanan says this din applies even after Yiosh. Now, let's think for a moment. If Yiosh is enough for the Ganev to become the owner, then why would he have to pay Arba v'chamisha after Yiosh? If by the time he sells or steals or shechts this animal, he's already the owner, then why is he paying 4 or 5 times the amount? He's the owner. He's selling his own animal. He's shechting his own animal. Of course, he still has to pay back the owner for the original amount of the animal. But he's now the owner. He can do with it as he wishes. Elomai, we must say that Rabbi Yochanan holds that Yiyush Kedi, Yiyush by itself, is not enough to become the owner. So even though the owner was Meyayish, the Ganev is still not the owner, and therefore, when he sells or shechts it, he's still required to pay Arba v'chamisha, depending if it's a sheep or an ox. So how do we reconcile these two Gemaras? Does Rabbi Yochanan hold Yiyush Kedi is koina or not koina? So answers Tosfos. The Gemara over here does not mean Yiyush Kedi is koina. Even though it says the word Yiyush, it means Yiyush together with something else. Together with what? With Shinoi Shem. Because what's the Gemara talking about? Where someone makes it a carbon, he makes it hektish. So the name of the animal changed. Until now it was an animal of chulin, and now it is called hektish. So there's Yush and Shinui Shem. This is why in our Gemara he is considered the owner. Nevertheless, he still cannot bring it as a carbon because of mitzvah haba ba'avera. Then Tosfos is mechadash even more, that once the item belongs to you, there's bichlal no problem of mitzvah haba ba'avera, because it's yours. So even if you originally it came to your hands by way of an avera, but now it belongs to you, you can do whatever you want with this animal or with this item, and including doing a mitzvah with it. We're going to explain then what was the problem with the animal for hektish. We'll see that in a moment. Tosfos proves this from the fact that the Gemara on the next Amud suggests that a Ganev should acquire Hadassim through Shinui Shem. The name changed, as the Gemara says. It changed. First it was called a regular Hadas, and now it's called a Hishaina, which was the name it was as part of the Arba Minim. And the Gemara doesn't seem to be bothered by mitzvah haba ba'avera. Even though this person is the Ganev, and they stole the animal, the Gemara is not bothered that, stole the Hadas, the Gemara is not bothered by the mitzvah haba ba'avera, as long as there was Shinoi Shem. Why not? So Tosfos says that must be because now that the Ganev is the owner, there's no longer a problem of mitzvah haba ba'avera. So in other words, once the item belongs to you, we don't have to be concerned of mitzvah haba ba'avera because you're the owner, you can do with it as you wish, including using it for a mitzvah. If, however, the item only becomes yours through the act of the mitzvah you are performing, so for example, this is explaining what about the case where the Ganev is being makdish, an animal for hektish. So there, because as Tosfos has said, Yush itself is not enough, so you need something else. And with the case of the Ganav and the Hektish, the other thing was making it Hektish. That's what caused the Kinyan. So which means that the Kinyan happened together with the mitzvah of making it Hektish, the Shinui Shem. That's what made the Kinyan. That's called a mitzvah babavera, that the Kinyan only happened through the mitzvah. That's a problem. That's a mitzvah babavera. And this explains our Gemara, the Gemara that talked about, the Gemara earlier, which spoke about a mitzvah babavera, with a Ganav, it makes it Hektish. That's because the act of the mitzvah, the act of changing the name to Hektish, is what made the Kinyan, and that is a problem. But had it belonged to the Ganav before, if he did something to the animal before, somehow he acquired the animal before making it Hektish, there would be no problem if he would then later on make it Hektish. That would not be considered a mitzvah hababavera. However, we can ask a question, as Tosfos does, what about the Gemara, on the next Amud, that suggests the Ganav should become the owner by way of Shinei Maisa? Which Maisa? Binding the Lulav. Is that not a case of ownership of a Kinyan which happens through the mitzvah of Eged, of binding the Lulav? And we just explained that if the Kinyan takes place through the mitzvah, that is a case of mitzvah babavera. So Tosfos explains, no. Either we can explain this according to that he bound the lulav before Yom Tov. So the Gemara that was talking about the Shinoi Maisa means that you're binding the lulav before Yom Tov, which is before any mitzvah begins. So that's not that the mitzvah is what causes the Kinyan. There's a Shinoi Maisa of binding before Yom Tov. And then on Yom Tov you're doing a mitzvah. That's not a problem. Or even, says Tosfos, if the Shinei Maisa, if the binding happens on Yom Tov, but it's not an actual part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to shake lulav and esrog, and you have to bind it before you shake it. So even though you're binding it on Yom Tov, but it's not as a part of the mitzvah. Therefore, by the time the mitzvah is actually performed, it already belongs to you, and it's not a mitzvah hababavera. One last question Tosfos asks is, what about the case we learned in the Gemara in Baba Kama of a Ganav who steals flour and turns it into bread, and the Gemara says that this person's bracha is a menaitz, it's disgusting because it's a mitzvah hababavera. And certainly there, the Ganav has already acquired the flour because he's done a Shinoi Maisa. So why then does the Gemara call it a mitzvah hababavera if by that time it already belonged to the Ganav? So answers Tosfos, over there it's different. Because that case involves a bracha, the bracha that you make, ala frashas challah, for separating challah. So when it comes to a bracha, we would still consider it a mitzvah of avera, even though it belongs to the Ganav. It's a big chiddush of Tosfos.